This video is available in more than 10 languages.
Cette vidéo est disponible dans plus de 10 langues.
Dieses Video ist in mehr als 10 Sprachen verfügbar.
Questo video è disponibile in più di 10 lingue.
Este vídeo está disponível em mais de 10 idiomas.
Este video está disponible en más de 10 idiomas.
So, we've all been talking about climate change for decades, right? But what if the answer isn't just about cutting emissions anymore? What if we could actually take control, actively re-engineer our entire planet's climate system? That's the promise and the peril of geoengineering. It's a massive technological gamble that could be our last best hope, or maybe our biggest mistake ever. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get a handle on what it even means to engineer the climate. Then, we're going to wade into the moral minefield this whole idea creates. From there, we'll look at the stark reality of who wins and who loses. And we'll finish with maybe the scariest part, the terrifying risk of what happens if we ever try to stop. Okay, first up, let's get grounded in the basics. What are we really talking about when we say engineering the climate? And, why is this idea, which was once on the absolute fringe of science, suddenly a serious topic of conversation? So the textbook definition talks about deliberate, large-scale manipulation. Let's be clear what that means. This isn't about planting a few more trees or putting solar panels on your roof. We are talking about massive, planet-altering interventions. The goal? To fundamentally change the Earth's energy balance. It's a leap into the unknown, on a scale humanity has just never attempted before. Generally, these ideas fall into two big buckets. On one side, you've got carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. You can think of this as the planet's cleanup crew. It's all about physically pulling CO2 out of the air to get at the root cause of the problem. But then you have the other approach, solar radiation management, or SRM. This one's more like a planetary sunshade. It doesn't get rid of the CO2, it just treats the fever by bouncing sunlight back into space. Now, CDR is slow, it's a long-term play. But SRM, the words you hear are fast, effective, and cheap. And that combination, well, that's exactly why it's so tempting and frankly so dangerous. It's where the real debate gets fiery. And as soon as we start talking about that choice, we step right into an incredibly deep and tangled ethical debate. The questions shift from, can we do this? To the much harder question, should we? These are profound moral problems that come up way before a single machine ever gets turned on. And you see, the ethical problems aren't just one single hurdle we have to clear. No, they pop up at every single stage of the game. The moment we even think about it, we're dealing with questions of arrogance and moral hazard. The minute we start researching it, we're asking who gets to consent to these experiments. If we ever implement it, it becomes a question of justice and unintended consequences. And if we ever try to stop it, we face a whole new category of danger. So let's start with this idea of moral hazard. It's a concept borrowed straight from the insurance industry. The question is this: if you believe there's a technological safety net, a get-out-of-jail-free card for the climate, does that make you less willing to do the hard, expensive work of actually cutting emissions? Does it encourage us to keep behaving recklessly because we think we have a magic fix? And then there's the question of pure hubris, the sheer arrogance of it all. As the philosopher Dale Jamieson has argued, this could be the ultimate expression of humanity's long and often disastrous history of trying to dominate nature instead of figuring out how to live within it. Are we really arrogant enough to think we can seize control of the entire planet's climate? This ties right into another major criticism, the idea of the technological fix. Are we just trying to slap a high-tech band-aid on one symptom, the planet's temperature, while completely ignoring the disease? The disease being our fundamental patterns of consumption and our reliance on fossil fuels. For many, this is just a way to avoid dealing with the real problem. The philosopher Stephen Gardner just puts it perfectly. He calls climate change a perfect moral storm for this exact reason. And he worries that the temptation of an easy fix, like geoengineering, becomes a massive act of avoidance. It allows the wealthy nations who created the mess to impose a risky, untested solution on the entire world, just so they don't have to make the difficult changes at home. And this is the point where all that abstract philosophical debate gets really concrete. We're moving away from theory now and looking at what the actual climate models predict will happen to real people in real places under a geoengineered sky. It really all boils down to one fundamental question of justice. When we decide to reach out and turn the global thermostat, who gets the benefits? And, more to the point, who is forced to pay the price for all the unpredictable side effects? And the climate models? Well, they paint a pretty grim picture. What you're looking at is a translation of this global idea into a potential regional catastrophe. Model after model converges on this one terrifying possibility, that cooling the planet by injecting aerosols into the stratosphere could severely disrupt the West African monsoon. The result? Catastrophic drought in the Sahel. Let's just spell out what that would mean. We're talking about massive impacts on farming, on water supplies, on energy for millions and millions of people. And here's the staggering injustice of it all. The very people who are already most vulnerable to climate change, and who did the least to cause it, could be the ones who are harmed the most by our so-called solution. And it's absolutely crucial to understand this. Solar radiation management doesn't just make the world cooler, it creates a different world with brand new winners and losers. Look at this map. The red shows where the models predict it would be actively damaging to rainfall patterns. The orange where it's just ineffective. The bottom line? We're looking at significant negative changes across almost half the planet's surface, imposing a whole new set of risks on billions of people who never signed up for this experiment. This also opens up a massive security threat, because some of these technologies are, relatively speaking, not that expensive. So what's to stop a single country or even a billionaire from deciding to do it themselves? As Professor Jim Haywood says, you would absolutely not want this done by a rogue actor. But the threat is very, very real. All right, and that brings us to our final section, and maybe the most frightening part of this entire discussion, especially when it comes to solar radiation management. Once you start, you might not be able to stop. Ever. There's a name for it, termination shock, and it's as bad as it sounds. See, SRM only masks the warming. The greenhouse gases are still building up in the background. So if that SRM program were ever stopped, maybe because of a war, an economic collapse, political breakdown, all that hidden warming would come rushing back, not over decades, but in the span of just a few years. These two maps show it all. On the left, you've got our geoengineered world. You see all that blue? The cooling effect. It seems to be working. But look at the map on the right. That is what happens the moment you switch it off. It is not a gentle return to normal. It is a global flash flood of extreme heat. Once you start down this road, you are locked in, maybe for centuries, because the consequences of stopping are a climate catastrophe far, far worse than what you were trying to prevent in the first place. The damage to the natural world would be almost unimaginable. Scientists talk about something called climate velocities. That's how fast a species would have to migrate to stay in a climate it can survive in. A termination shock would create velocities more than double what we're already seeing from climate change. And most ecosystems, they just can't move that fast. This map here shows the areas in red that would be at the highest risk for something called climate fragmentation. That's a scientific way of saying that a species' home, its habitat, would essentially shatter into a million little pieces, making it impossible to migrate. The result would be a massive spike in local extinctions. We're talking about destabilizing the very conditions for life across huge parts of our planet. And so, at the end of the day, all the science, all the models, all the ethics, it all comes back to this one single monumental question. A question humanity has never, ever had to ask before. Who gets to control the global thermostat? Who has the right? Who has the wisdom? And who on Earth has the authority to make a decision that will change the future for every single person and every living thing on this planet?